Debate on the question that the committee has considered strengthening the union as it relates to Wales. Can I just advise the Grand Committee that, given the number of speakers, if people confine, people will need to confine their speeches to 5 minutes in order to get everybody in. And it's a great pleasure to ask David Jones to resume his speech, who won't take all that 5 minutes, I'm sure. David.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Davis. You'll recall that just before the adjournment, I was mentioning the difficulties that the Welsh Government was having in delivering medical and educational services, and I made the point that devolution should not mean operating in a silo. It should mean sharing best practice and trying to benefit from the experience of others. And frequently in Cardiff Bay, that is not the case. There's a sort of constitutional teenage angst, a sort of stubborn reluctance to cooperate with other partners in the Union, which frankly should now have disappeared now that devolution has matured. I do hope that this will change, and indeed there is cause for hope that it will change with the publication last week by the government and the devolved administrations of the review of intergovernmental relations. Which recites that the four administrations of the United Kingdom will work collaboratively. And it is, we're told, and I quote, built on principles of mutual respect and trust, respecting the reserved powers of the UK Government and Parliament, and the devolved competencies of the Scottish Government, Welsh Government, Northern Ireland Executive, and their legislatures. Now that is extremely encouraging. And we're told that these new structures will provide for ambitious and effective working to support our COVID recovery, tackle the climate change crisis and inequalities, and deliver sustainable growth. And this does seem to herald a new relationship of mutual respect of one another's competencies. Well, given that the Welsh Government has just signed up to that, I'm finding it hard to understand that why, when the Constitution is a reserved competence under the 2017 Act, the Welsh Government has set up a commission under the joint chairmanship of no less a figure than the Right Reverend and Right Honourable Lord Williams of Oystermouth, the former Archbishop of Canterbury, to, and again I quote, consider and develop options for fundamental reform of the constitutional structures of the United Kingdom, in which Wales remains an integral part. Well, Mr. Davis, quite frankly, under the terms of the devolution settlement as we have it, the Constitution of the United Kingdom is no business of the Welsh Government. It's firmly a reserved matter. And one really has to wonder how the Welsh Government would react if Her Majesty's Government, having regard to the deficiencies in the delivery of medical services and educational services in Wales, decided that it would set up a commission into the delivery of those services by the Welsh Government. There would be absolute horror and outrage. The Welsh Government would be affronted. There would be a violent and adverse reaction. So, Mr. Davis, it's clear that the Welsh Government is doing very well out of the Union, as indeed are the people of Wales. And it's clear also that the Welsh Government has acknowledged, by signing up to the review of intergovernmental relations, that there are limits to its devolved competence. I would strongly urge the Welsh Government, in the interest of good relations with the other nations of the United Kingdom, to confine itself within those boundaries. The review, Mr. Davis, is a sound basis for future cooperative relations within the Union. I hope that it will be adhered to by all parties who have signed up to it, and that it heralds a new chapter in intergovernmental relations within the United Kingdom.
Diolch, Mr. Davis. Rwyf wrth fy modd I gymryd rhan yn ddadl uwch bwyllgor hwn, y gyntaf mewn 4 blynedd. Dydyn ni erioed wedi gweld wahaniaethau mor ddwys rhwng Lloegr a Chymru. Rydyn ni'n fel adeiladau seneddol yma yn San Steffan a rhan a'i hetholwyr, pobl Cymru, fy etholwyr I yng Ngogledd Caerdydd. y bobl hynny dros y 2 flynedd ddiwethaf, sydd wedi dioddef torcalon, trafferthion ac anobaith, fel nad ydym ni erioed wedi ei gweld o'r blaen wrth i bob un ohonom ni geisio yn dypu ar pandemig hwn. It has been, Mr. Chair, heartbreaking for so many, having to say goodbye to loved ones over an iPad, forced to live with the fact that a parent, a husband, a wife, a brother, a sister died alone, looked after by our incredible NHS, but nursed by someone behind a mask and a visor, not able to hold their hand, stroke their head or kiss them goodbye. These are the realities of this dreadful pandemic that we have all been touched by in some way. And this pandemic has not gone away. The difference in how our Welsh Labour government has and continues to respond to this pandemic is stark. But it is no surprise that the Sunday Times declared the First Minister of Wales comfortably the most popular UK leader. This is while the Prime Minister's approval ratings dropped to their lowest ever. But our First Minister followed the science. The Prime Minister ignored it, but worse, he partied. And Number 10 became the most popular venue in England for illegal parties. While people made unimaginable sacrifices, lost loved ones, isolated themselves from family and friends, didn't see people for months, Number 10 sent someone out with a suitcase to get more wine. The Prime Minister didn't know or didn't participate. Well, frankly, that is nonsense. The contrast with our Labour government in Wales is stark. And in October 2020, Wales was put into a firebreak lockdown, as the science advised. But the Prime Minister here decided against it for England, leading to a longer lockdown starting in November that year. In December 2020, the Welsh Government announced the most generous business support package in the UK. And by May last year, the Welsh Labour Government had spent £2.3 billion on COVID grants and relief to businesses, £400 million more than England. Mark Drakeford repeatedly called for a four-nation approach to COVID, which the UK government continually undermined. Instead, they have made it impossible to work together, not least the fact that they are simply not a functioning government right now. But excluding the devolved nations at every opportunity seems to be the default. The Joint Ministerial Committee, where the four nations come together, is supposed to be the vehicle to make these crucial decisions. But it has not met once during the pandemic, and not once during this Prime Minister's leadership, if you can call it a leadership. It is clear that this government's priority is to dismantle the democratic powers given to the devolved nations and instead demonstrate a blatant power grab for themselves. And due to the pandemic, the whole of the UK, up and down the country, people have witnessed the contrast in approach. They have all been able to see Mark Drakeford's careful, measured approach, his quiet consideration of questions, his fulsome and honest answers, even when they have not been easy or even palatable. I'll give way.
Thank you for giving way and totally endorse the points that she's making. Would you also agree there's been a very welcome contrast and pay tribute to, for example, Cardiff and Vale Health Board? She and I have spent many hours on phone calls with members of all parties and people from both this Parliament and indeed the Senate, being transparent, having open discussions with officials and getting the information our constituents need. She agreed there was a contrast when we heard from colleagues in England who are not getting that information in some cases from their health boards, you know, perhaps because of the Department of Health encouraging them to hold back that information.
Thank my honourable friend for making that brilliant point. And indeed, Cardiff and the Vale Health Board have been exemplary in their handling of the pandemic, going the extra mile, all of their staff across the health board have, and in rolling out the vaccine fast and efficiently. But the people of Wales are truly grateful. They rewarded Mark and his government with the biggest mandate for Labour we've seen in the Senate elections this last year. But unfortunately, it is always a fight with Westminster. You'll get what you're given is a concept Wales has become all too familiar with after over a decade of Tory governments. I'll give way.
Jamie Wallace.
Thank you very much. Thank the Honourable Lady for giving way. You take the view that the Westminster government, the Conservative Westminster government, sort of power grab and undermines devolution at every turn and doesn't respect it. How do you reconcile that view with the fact that the Senate has never been given more powers than it has under Conservative governments since 2010, including a referendum in 2011, which we respected, by the way?
It's never enough.
I thank the Honourable Member for making that point, but, you know, we are undermined at every opportunity to make those decisions, and that is evidenced throughout this pandemic. And this is as we face a huge cost of living crisis as a result of these disastrous Tory government decisions. And it seems at the very heart of decision making, the government's intentions have been to undermine our democracy and underfund our services. The community renewal and levelling up funds excluded the Welsh Government so they could be controlled entirely by UK government ministers. It is clear that what they're trying to do is strip powers away from the Welsh Government and level down Labour Wales. And what of Brexit? That great promise from this Prime Minister. Well, let's just say that honesty has never been his strong point. The UK government... I'll give way.
Can I thank the Honourable for giving way? Just on the Levelling Up Fund and the Shared Prosperity and the Community CRF Fund, does she share the sentiments of the leader of Rhondda Cynon Taf, who was incredibly successful in that Levelling Up Fund? And does she share my view that actually this is proper devolution and actually asking local authorities what they might want from these schemes rather than diktat from the centre?
Well, thank you, but I think if you speak to the majority of local authorities, they will agree that they work very well with Welsh Government, and what this is a taking away of powers. The UK Government repeatedly assured us that we would not lose. I'll give way one last time.
Very, very briefly, is the Minister surprised, is the member surprised that one of the constituencies that are as well out of levelling up from poverty towards something near to not poverty is one of the poorest in Wales?
Indeed, that won't surprise me at all, and this is symptomatic of this Tory government that only seems interested in themselves. But we were assured that Wales wouldn't lose a single penny of EU funding after Brexit. Fast forward and Wales are set to receive just 5% of the Community Renewal Fund. That equates to around £450,000 per local authority. But if we'd have remained in the EU, Wales would have received at least £375 million each year for 7 years from January 2021. Yet another lie. Our businesses, I will in a second.
So you actually want to rephrase that.
Perhaps I could raise the whole speech. Give an explanation.
Yeah, no, you don't want to give it.
Our businesses and communities.
Mr. Chair.
Actually, no. I know it's a point of fact whether the money will eventually arrive to it. But I mean, I obviously you have used the word lie. I'm in the chair, and you're putting me in a very difficult position. So I'd be grateful if you would withdraw that.
Seems to be.
Yeah.
Our businesses and communities right across Cardiff North and the whole of Wales are buckling under the pressure from the truly appalling. I'll withdraw that for now from the record. For now, but I think the record will show that this will have been a lie. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. This Tory government is punishing Wales and our communities, and it is the people of Wales who pay the price. Thankfully, we do have a radical Labour government in Wales that is able to mitigate the worst of this UK government. And in June 2021, a new climate change super ministry was established to help Wales reach its legally binding target of reaching net zero by 2050. All the while, the UK government's own climate advisors warned they were failing to deliver on promises to dramatically cut the UK's greenhouse gas emissions. Talking the talk, but failing to act. And I am proud that as a special advisor in the Welsh Labour government for 6 years, I was able to bring forward legislation on the environment, on climate, but also to create the Future Generations Act, a groundbreaking act putting sustainability at the heart of decision-making in the public sector. And in November 2021, it was announced that all primary school children in Wales will be given free school meals. In that same year, the UK government stopped similar measures being brought forward in the school breakfast bill by my honourable friend, the member for South Shields. And I am proud that Wales has become a world leader in their treatment of refugees. As a nation of sanctuary, we ensure that refugees who have been displaced through the trauma of war or division can find a home in Wales. This is stark, grave contrast to the UK government's Nationality and Borders Bill, which increases risk of discrimination and human rights violations. And I am proud that we have in Wales our own Violence Against Women, Domestic Abuse and Sexual Violence Act passed in 2015. But I think I don't really have time. But 7 years later, the UK government has still not followed suit, and there remains to be a legislative commitment to ending violence against women and girls. It's heartbreaking. Most women I speak to say they would not repeat having to put themselves through this broken justice system. This government is failing women and girls, failing victims everywhere, and far too are let down and treated as an afterthought. Unless we put them and their experiences at the centre of justice, we will not get there anywhere. If the UK government is unable to do this, then give us the powers to do it ourselves. It's clear this UK government has failed and continues to fail to understand or support devolution, and as a result fails the people of Wales. This Tory government is probably doing more to break up the union than any of our nationalist parties. How much longer do we put up with this chaos, impacting our communities in Wales as a result of this shoddy, corrupt Westminster government? Mae'n bryd cael gwared ar y prif weinidog hwn a sicrhau bod pobl Cymru bob amser yn dod yn gyntaf. Diolch.
Need to be nearer to sort of 4 or 5, and with HS2 in mind, Jamie Wallace.
A delight to see you in the chair today. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. I believe this debate to be one of the most important debates I've actually participated in since being elected to Parliament. And I stood for Parliament precisely because I am unashamedly a staunch unionist, and I believe that Wales, and specifically my constituents, benefit immensely from being part of the United Kingdom. The Union ensures greater prosperity and security for Wales, whilst also being representative of our shared culture and history that is far greater than political divisions. Yet, it angers and saddens me that the Welsh Labour government, propped up by their nationalist coalition allies implied, have no interest whatsoever in strengthening the Union, and instead remain focused on pursuing a reckless separatist agenda. When the First Minister of Wales stated that his support for the Union is not unconditional, it proves that he cannot be trusted to value and protect our United Kingdom. Let us also not forget the grave constitutional damage the First Minister caused when he failed to support delivering Brexit, even when 52.5% of the Welsh public voted to leave the EU, more than those that voted for the formation of the Senedd in 1997. Welsh Labour and Plaid ignored the will of the Welsh people, instead painting Brexit as a ludicrous venture. Labour and Plaid, ignoring the largest democratic mandate in our country's history, continue to show their disdain for the Welsh people through their demonstration to break up Britain. A separate and politically isolated Wales would not benefit my constituents, nor would it benefit the wider Welsh population. Under the current First Minister, a vocal supporter of Jeremy Corbyn in his bid for the national leadership of the Labour Party in 2015, we've been given a taste of the illogical and authoritarian measures that we can expect from a separate Wales. Some examples: banning the purchase of non-essential items in supermarkets that led to mass confusion and cases of women being unable to obtain sanitary products, proposed curfews on men, and a focus on taking performative woke actions on statues and street names rather than focus on important issues such as health and the economy. Because of Welsh Government inaction, 1 in 4 people wait more than 52 weeks to be seen for non-urgent treatment, and even Lee Waters, the Deputy Minister for the Economy, admitted that they, quote, don't really know what they're doing on the economy. Yet, even whilst the Welsh Government continue to undermine our vital union, the UK Government continues to make the positive case for strengthening it. For example, the UK Government agreed to the largest funding settlement since devolution was implemented in 1998. Now that we have taken back control of our own laws, thanks to the UK Government delivering Brexit, the global trade deals that we've done are helping to increase Welsh export and directly benefit companies within my Bridgend constituency. The UK Government Freeport scheme has been enthusiastically welcomed across the whole of Wales, and it is my firm belief that Freeport will bring economic growth and job creation to the whole of the UK, another clear benefit of our union. I welcome the fact that the UK Government continues to pledge to establish at least one Freeport in Wales as soon as possible, despite the Welsh Government at times acting as an obstacle to this. I once again suggest that Port Talbot and Bridgend area could lend itself fantastically to the establishment of the UK Government's first Freeport in Wales, creating up to 15,000 jobs in the process. Crucially, the Union has ensured that we can effectively respond to the greatest public health crisis in over a century. The most successful elements of our response have been when the 4 nations have worked together. It has enabled us to secure vaccines for the whole of the United Kingdom, and without it, we would certainly have been unable to deliver the fastest vaccine rollout in Europe. At the same time, our political union protected the NHS across all of the UK and ensured it could cope with the additional strains the pandemic created. And with the UK Government providing £34 billion of emergency support this year alone. Lastly, the UK Government's swift and decisive action mitigated the virus's impact on the economy with £400 billion of support, protecting over 14.6 million jobs through the furlough and self-employed schemes. Many of those are my Bridgend constituents. I urge my political opponents to cease this dangerous separatist agenda. I am proudly British, but I am also proudly Welsh. We must be proud of our shared history and our shared culture. Wales plays a vital role in our United Kingdom. Indeed, we are more than just a union. We are 4 nations united as one country.
Diolch yn fawr iawn i chi, Mr Davies. Mae'n bleser cyfrannu i'r ddadl yma yn yr uwch Bwyllgor Cymreig ac i wneud hynny yn y Gymraeg. Mae testyn y ddadl heddiw yn un diddorol am ei fod yn amlygu paranoiau'r pleidiau unoliaethol am ddyfodol y wladwriaeth Brydeinig. Yn y degawd diwethaf, mae 2 digwyddiad seismig wedi gosod bom niwclear o dan cyfansoddiad y wladwriaeth Brydeinig, sef referendwm annibyniaeth yr Alban ac wrth gwrs Brexit. Cyn hyn oll, roedd Cymru a'r wladwriaeth Brydeinig ar daith gyfansoddiadol esblygiadol. Roedd pwerau cynyddol yn trosglwyddo'r lle yma i lawr yr M4 i fai Caerdydd, ac roedd y ddadain yn troi o gwmpas pa mor gyflym y dylai hyn digwydd, yn enwedig wedi referendwm 2011. Roedd gwleidyddion fel finne am weld trosglwyddo'n digwydd ar raddfa fwy cyflym, gyda unolaethwyr yn cefnogi proses fwy araf. Mae Brexit wedi newid cyd-destun yma yn llwyr. Bellach mae'r garfan sydd yn cefnogi datblygiad gwleidyddol cenedlaethol Cymru yn gofod amddiffyn y pwerau ni ennill dros y degawdau diwethaf ac yn wir datganoli ei hun. Mae hyn yn digwydd oherwydd bod athroniaeth Brexit am lawer mwy nac ail rymuso San Steffan trwy adennill pwerau o Fryssel yn unig. Mae'n amlwg bellach bod Brexit yn cael ei defnyddio i ail sefydlu gorechafiaeth San Steffan dros Cymru a'r Alban. Yn ystod referendum Ewrop, roedd cefnogwyr Brexit wedi gwneud pob math o addwidion am fwy o bwerau newydd i Gymru os oedden ni'n pleidleisio dros adael yr Undeb Ewropeaidd. Yr addewid oedd i drosglwyddo pwerau yn uniongyrchol i Senedd Cymru o Frwsel. Be sydd wedi digwydd wrth gwrs yw'r gwrthwyneb yn llwyr gyda Llywodraeth Prydain yn dwyn pwerau Cymru heb unrhyw fanda democratiaeth Cymreig i wneud hynny. Yn gynyddol, rydyn ni'n symud at setiad datganoli mewn enw yn unig, devolution in name only. Gyda Llywodraeth Cymru bellach yn etifeddu'r teitl dirmygus gweinyddiaeth ddatganoledig yn ytrach na statws cenedlaethol. Yn y Britannia a Brexit, dim ond un llywodraeth genedlaethol sy'n cael bodoli. Ar ôl canlyniad referendum Ewrop, a phenderfyniad Llywodraeth Prydain i ddilyn llwybr Brexit eithafol gan rwygo Prydain allan o'r farchnad sengl, roedd angen... Gai bennu'r paragraff fan hyn. Roedd angen creu marchnad ar gyfer Cymru, Lloegr a'r Alman gyda fframweithiau a reoliadau newydd.
Ar y pwynt am Brexit eithafol, yr unig reisym dyn ni wedi cael Brexit glir ydy oherwydd y ffaith bod aelod o Blaid Cymru a Plaid Lafur wedi bleidleisio yn erbyn y cytundeb gan Theresa May. Ond dych chi'n credu y ddylen ni ymddangos yr un pach tuag at y canlyniad o referendum yng Nghymru fel aelod o Blaid Cymru yn ymddangos am y ffaith bod y bobl y Cymru wedi bleidleisio o blaid y Senedd a Cynulliad.
Jonathan Edwards.
Rwy'n ddiolchgar iawn am ymweliad ar ymgais i ail-sgwennu hanes. Roedd yn safiad i ac yn wir Plaid Cymru yn hollol gryf. Byddwn ni wedi pleidleisio blaid Brexit pe bydde polisi Llywodraeth Prydain i aros o fewn fframweithiau economaidd Ewropa. Mae reswm hwnna'n bwysig wrth gwrs oherwydd y cysylltiadau economaidd cryf a pwysigrwydd export i economi Cymru. A mae hwnna'n dod â fi at sefyllfa Gogledd Iwerddon. Byddai'n siarad lot fwy am beth hwnna yn ddyfodol yn yr areth wrth i fi mynd yn ei flaen. O fewn cyd-destun ddyfodol y cyfansoddiad Prydeinig, dim ond 2 ddewis oedd ar gael wedi gwneud y penderfyniad i adael y farchnad sengl Ewropeaidd. Y dewis cyntaf oedd ar gael i Llywodraeth Prydain oedd i greu marchnad newydd ar sail cyfartaledd rhwng Llywodraeth Cymru a'r Alban a San Steffan. Model amel begynnol yn debyg i'r Undeb Ewropeaidd gyda phob aelod yn gyfartal ar sail strwythurau rynglywodraethol clir gyda perchnogaeth ar y cyd dros y farchnad ac unrhyw gyrff rheoleiddio. Rwy'n credu byddai strategaeth o'r fath wedi cryfau'r undeb o ran y perthynas ar ynys Prydain Fawr. Ond penderfynu ar ail drywydd wnaeth Llywodraeth Prydain, sef cynoli grym, pŵer a dylanwad yn San Steffan. Yr athroniaeth yw ail ddyfeisio ynys Prydain fel gwladwriaeth unedol a throi cefn ar ddegawdau o gynnydd gwleidyddol Cymreig ac Albanedd. Mae deddfwriaeth ôl Brexit megis deddf marchnad mewnol, bil reoli cymorthaliadau a cynlluniau fel y gronfa ffyniant gyffredin yn dwyn pwerau Cymru. Mae hyd yn oed deddfwriaeth megis y deddf iechyd a gofal, y deddf etholiadau, y deddf heddlu, y deddf cymwysterau proffesiynol a deddf amgylcheddol i gyd yn tanseilio pwerau Cymru. Yn wir tybiaf bod Llywodraeth Prydain bellach yn defnyddio unrhyw deddfwriaeth i danseilio ac erydu sofraniaeth gwleidyddol Cymreig. Cyn Brexit, y Confensiwn Clir oedd na fyddai'r Llywodraeth Prydeinig yn deddfu mewn maes datganoledig, sef Confensiwn Siwel. Cyn 2018, ble roedd San Steffan yn cydnabod bod y maes yn ddatganoledig, ni ffaswyd unrhyw deddfwriaeth gan Lywodraeth Prydain heb ganiatâd Senedd Cymru. Yn ystod y cyfnod yma, byddai gweithredu heb ganiatâd wedi arwain at argyfwng cyfansoddiadol. Bellach mae Llywodraeth Prydain yn diystyrru yn llwyr yr angen i dderbyn cydsyniad cyn ymyrryd mewn meysydd sydd wedi ei ddatganoli i Gymru a'r Alban. O ystyried yr holl rhethreg am grefau'r undeb, y gwirionedd yw bod y cytundeb Brexit Llywodraeth Prydain wedi rannu'r wladwriaeth Brydeinig yn 2 barth economaidd, gyda 6 sir Gogledd Iwerddon i bob pwrpas yn aros o fewn farchnad sengl a'r undeb trollau Ewropeaidd. Tra roedd aelod seneddol Maidenhead yn brif weinidog, gwrthododd rannu'r wladwriaeth Brydeinig yn economaidd mwyn cael cytundeb Brexit. Cam cyntaf, aelod seneddol Uxbridge fel prif weinidog oedd cytuno i safiad negodi greiddiol yr Undeb Ewropeaidd, sef gosod ffin yn y môr Celtaidd. Ers arwyddo'r cytundeb wrth gwrs, rwyfo yn ôl fi strategaeth Llywodraeth Prydain, a dyna pam rydym ni parhau wynebu'r holl helyn dros brotocol Gogledd Iwerddon. Mae gan uniolaethwyr Gogledd Iwerddon bob reswm i feddwl eu bod wedi cael ei brydychu. Mewn dadl ar gryfau'r undeb felly, Mr Davies, mae'n bwysig nodi bod Llywodraeth Prydain wedi cyflymu'r broses o ailuno Iwerddon yn sylweddol. Ond yn ôl i Gymru, rwy'n tybio bod rai ar y meincau ceidwadol yn brolio am agwedd ymysodol Llywodraeth Prydain tuag at sefydliadau democratiaeth Cymru. o strategaeth tymor byr yw Mr Davies, ac yn yr hir dymor, yn enwedig wrth edrych ar ddatblygiadau ar Ynys Iwerddon a'r Alban, gwanhau'r undeb yw canlyniad agwedd Llywodraeth Pryden. Yn ddios, mae mwyafrif tir yng Nghymru o blaid datganoli, ac wrth i Lywodraeth Pryden danseilio'r setliad presennol, maen nhw'n gorfodi dewis rhwng annibyniaeth a reolaeth uniongyrchol yn Llundain. Mae twf ryfeddol mewn cefnogaeth i annibyniaeth dros y blynyddoedd diwethaf yn dyst i hynny, yn enwedig ymysg pleidleiswyr y Blaid Lafur. A tra bod egni gwleidyddol y Blaid Lafur yn cael ei signo gan drafodau modolau fel Home Rule neu datganoli radical, mewn ymgais i roi sgwâr ar gylch, mae pobl Cymru yn canolbwyntio ar y gwir dewis a bydd yn ei gwynebu yn y dyfodol. A felly, Mr Davies, i gloi, meges dechrau yw'r frwydr dros Gymru. Diolch yn fawr iawn.
I now call Craig Williams. Craig.
Thank you, Mr. Davis.
4 minutes if you can.
You in the chair, mainly so I can mention a couple of subjects like Brexit, and maybe through your impartial chairmanship you won't be triggered, but it is a great pleasure nonetheless to take part in this debate and see you there. It's also a great pleasure to follow both the opening remarks from the Secretary of State and several members opposite here, and it's worth reflecting, I suppose, that 4 years ago in the last Welsh Grand Committee the world has changed a little bit. Not only has it changed with the relationship with the European Union, it's also changed in terms of our dynamic in public discourse and the fact that we have been living through a pandemic, now arguably the start of an endemic, and we moved to a different place, and there's going to be different reactions. But what's also stabilised during the pandemic crisis from a constitutional point of view, that there is no doubt that there is 4 governments within the United Kingdom, but clearly that the UK government throughout this crisis has had the depth, the strength, the forward thinking, the agility, the ability, not just through the vaccination programme. If the member would like to interrupt from a sedentary position, albeit, but I can't hear him through his mask, luckily. But going through the thought process of what the UK government has been able to achieve throughout this crisis, and if members will reflect that now and 18 months ago we were fearful of huge unemployment, we were fearful of a huge recession, we now sit in this chamber, or stand in this chamber, reflecting of the labour shortage. We are having this debate, Mr Davis, in the context of huge pressures in terms of getting people into work and historic unemployment. Those are terrific challenges to have, and if I dare say, if we had a Welsh Grand Committee 2 years ago, those will not have been the challenges that the opposition benches would have been charging us with. But also looking at the strength of the Union and to what that new relationship means now we've left the European Union. If you look at the Mid-Wales Growth Deal Fund, it was a great pleasure to see the leader of Ceredigion, Plaid Cymru, and the leader of Powys, independent Conservative, agreeing with UK government and Welsh government on how great it is to sign the Mid-Wales Growth Deal. And it was a pleasure to see the Minister committing significant amounts of money to Mid-Wales, which is often a completely forgotten part of Wales. It is hugely overlooked by a very Cardiff-centric Welsh government, and it was a great privilege to watch multiple different parties of colours and 2 different governments, Welsh government and UK government, get together and deliver a significant investment. But also the Levelling Up Fund, the new iteration, the new way of getting what used to be the old European funding regime, normally into some revenue-driven job creation scheme in the valleys that added very little to GVA over the long term, but prevented short-term press releases that we all remember certain members crowing about. But this Levelling Up Fund it's not an attack on devolution at all. How anyone can call it that when you've got local authorities, carte blanche, working with their businesses and their local communities and their county councillors, their community councillors, their third parties, to put together bids into a funding pot that is really and truly delivering for the whole of the United Kingdom. And I took great delight in the wins in Powys, because Powys missed so many times, Mid-Wales missed so many times from any opportunities of getting any structural funds. And now, for the first time ever, we are seeing the real opportunities to, and I can see Mr Davis is already indicating I should probably think about shutting up. So I can't, Mr Chairman, before I mention of course, the Montgomery Canal, and I haven't even mentioned it. And the huge regenerative opportunities if Powys County Council come to the table with us and put a master plan on the back of that huge public sector injection of cash. And I will finish by saying the great opportunities for Welsh lamb out there. Randall Parker, one of our biggest abattoirs, certainly in Wales for Welsh meat, has just been bought by Pilgrim UK, and that's going to see a new ramping up of investment and ability, and I'm extremely excited by the SPS changes, and I will be, and I hope I leave in this consensual fashion by saying, of course those SBS checks would have probably happened had we still been member of the European Union. However, they're extremely welcome. We've managed it on our own, dealing with our US counterparts, and other trade deals in the Gulf are really going to see a regeneration in Welsh lamb around the world. I'm excited, my constituents are excited, businesses and farmers are excited, Mr. Chairman, and I will let other members speak.
Diolch yn fawr, Gadeirydd, yn falch iawn y gyfle i siarad ac yn gyfle i siarad yn Gymraeg i dechrau ac yn Saesneg wedyn. Mae perthynasau ar unrhyw safon rhwng aelodau yn tîm neu gymdeithas neu a safon yngwladol rhwng gwledydd gyda safbwyntiau yn hollol wahanol yn dibynnu ar ddadl, ar gonsensus, ar ymgynghori, ar gyfarfawr. Ydym yn deall wrth gwrs ar ôl i ni adael yn dyfer y pair, byddai pwerau ar ôl gan yn dyfer y pair i benderfynu gwyddorion ar sut i wario arian yn dod yn ôl i'r Deyrnas Unedig. Ond, ar ôl addewid y Llywodraeth Gyrgwadol, byddai Cymru yn dal i gael yr un swm o arian, dim o gwbl, a ddewid sydd wedi cael torri. Beth digwyddodd i dim ffeiniog yn llai. Roedd Cymru yn arfer cael 24% o gronfau strwythurol yr Undeb Ewropeaidd sy'n dod i blodau. Ond ar ôl datganiad y cymhellol, byddwn ni'n cael dim ond 7%. Ond beth sy'n od iawn, pam mae'r Llywodraeth Twriaid y Deyrnas Unedig wedi penderfynu i osgoi siarad a chydweithio gyda'r Llywodraeth Cymru i benderfynu sut i wario yr arian yma. Mae gan Llywodraeth Cymru blynyddoedd o brofiad o delio ag arian Ewropeaidd, o ddatblygu cynlluniau strategol gyda chymhorau lleol i benderfynu blaenoriaethau gyda'n gilydd. Ac wrth gwrs...
David Davis, diolch iawn i'r aelod i Rwyff o'r, ond dych chi'n cytuno bod ni wedi siarad, trafod y ffordd ni'n mynd i wario'r arian gyda'r awdurdodau lleol, a dych chi yn croesawu ffaith bod ni'n gweithio nawr yn agos iawn gyda'r awdurdodau lleol ledled Cymru. Neu Griffith?
Wel, yn gwneud bod pwysig iawn, ac yn y ffaith yw dylai fe fod y cymhorau lleol, Llywodraeth Cymru, a Llywodraeth y Deyrnas Unedig. A ddim yn deall pam ydych chi'n mynd osgoi y bobl yn y canol, y Llywodraeth Cymru. Ac maen nhw yn gweithio yn agos iawn, maen nhw wedi gweithio agos iawn tro'r pandemig gyda chymhorau lleol. Na beth sydd wedi digwydd, mae perthynas yn arbennig o dda. Nid yn unig gyda chymhorau dan arweinyddiaeth llafur, ond hefyd dan arweinyddiaeth o barn gwleidyddol eraill. Ac y ffaith yw, beth sydd wedi digwydd yn Lloegr, roedd rhai cymhorau dim yn gwybod beth roedd yn digwydd yn Cadaloedd nhw yn noson cyn i fynd awr i Cymru Clo. Na beth digwyddodd yn Lloegr, mae contrast yn llawn gyda beth digwyddodd yn Cymru, lle mae perthynas rhwng y cynghorau a Llywodraeth Cymru yn gwych. A dylai fe fod tîm Llywodraeth y Deyrnas Unedig, Llywodraeth Cymru a chynghorau lleol. Ond wrth gwrs nawr, ynglyn â'r cronfa fynyddu cymunedol a cronfa codi gwastad, dim sgwrs o gwbl ni wedi cael o'r Llywodraeth Deyrnas Unedig gyda Llywodraeth Cymru bod yr arian yn mynd i gael i wario mewn meysydd sydd wedi cael ei datganoli. Na'r pwynt. Dylai penderfyniadau ar sut i wario y cronfau yma gael ei wneud gan Llywodraeth Cymru. Ond o leia, gyda newid agwedd o Llywodraeth y Deyrnas Unedig ac ymrwymiad diffyant i ymgynghori ac i gydweithio gyda Llywodraeth Cymru a'r gamau nesaf y cronfa codi gwasad, fe allan ni gael defnydd llawer mwy effeithiol ac yn werth am arian. Mae dau gwestiwn i'r ysgrifennydd gwladol. Beth am sicrhau yr un safon o'r ariannu mae Cymru wedi derbyn o'r gronfeydd Ewropeaidd? Dim cael i'w gynllai i drio wneud iawn am methiant hanesyddol i'r Llywodraeth i fusoddi yn ddigonol yng Nghymru. Mae siawns nawr gyda fe i wneud hyn. Ac yn ail, beth am ddechrau nawr i gydweithio gyda Llywodraeth Cymru ynglŷn â chynghorau lleol a'r sut i ddefnyddio'r cronfa codi gwastod, i adeiladu ar ei phrofiad, i adlewyrchu'n well barn cymunedau ar draws Cymru ac i ddefnyddio'r cronfa yn fwy strategol. Ond, yn anffodus, ydyn ni wedi gweld yr un peth gan Lywodraeth yr Iaith y Daearnas Unedig gyda ddeddf marchnad fewnol. Wrth gwrs, bydd i gyd yn mwyn yr oedd o masnach ar draws y Daearnas Unedig, byddai wedi bod yn bosib creu strwythur i roi mwy o bach, mwy o werth, mwy o lais i'r wledydd ddatganoledig yn lle mynd yn ôl at cyntundebau datganoli. It may seem ironic, Chair, but in order to create a stronger union, we actually need a clearer, more firmly embedded devolution settlement that cannot easily be torn up at the whim of the government. Much has been written about this, with ideas set out in the Welsh Labour Government's document, Reforming Our Union. But most importantly, it's a matter of having respect between the UK Government and the devolved governments. And also, the UK Government should not normally seek to legislate in areas which are devolved to the Welsh Government without the Welsh Government's consent. And more importantly, the concept of not normally should be entrenched and codified by proper definition. It references to the importance of developing common frameworks and shared delivery mechanisms and joint governance arrangements developed through a collaborative and consensual approach. And of course, where there are reserved matters with significant impact on Wales, there should be the opportunity for proper consultation, as indeed with trade negotiations. Instead, we've seen the absolutely appalling betrayal of Welsh farmers in the Australia deal.
Right, Honourable I'm very grateful to her for giving way, and it appears to me that she agrees with much of what I was trying to say in my contribution to this debate. In other words, the need for collaboration and cooperation between the two administrations and respecting the devolved competences. But how does she feel about the Welsh Government setting up a commission into the constitution of the United Kingdom? Doesn't she believe that that's a breach of the constitutional settlement?
I think the point is that in any constitutional debate, you would want to have views from all levels. And the issue is how does Wales relate to the United Kingdom? And I think that's a very valid point for Welsh Government to have a view on. And it's certainly something that we do need to explore further. And as I say, it's part of the discussion that has already been started in previous documents from Welsh Government. Let's try and get that relationship right so that we don't see the devolution settlement being rolled back. And as I say, in respect of the Australian deal, how on earth can Welsh farmers possibly compete with the huge farms in Australia, plus the lower environmental standards that we certainly don't want to go down to? And I do feel that with the trade deals, there's a real danger government is going to just open doors to imports to flood the country and leave our farming and industrial base in a very, very difficult position. We're already seeing that with steel, where the government has been very slow and selective in renewing trade remedies, i.e. limits on the dumping of Chinese steel, and at the same time slow to get the US to lift tariffs, whereas in fact the EU has managed to get those tariffs lifted on steel and obviously will have a competitive advantage over us now. Look, we could discuss the technical detail of how these mechanisms should work, but really it's the feeling. It's about preserving the union. We want to feel secure and not to have our government threatened. We want to feel respected, valued by the UK government. Wales has contributed a huge amount to the UK over the years, fuelled the UK on Welsh coal, helped to fill the coffers from a strong industrial base, and we continue to do so. And that's why, particularly as my honourable friend from Blaenau Gwent mentioned this morning, the government now should honour the Bayes report and look again at that 50-50 split of the minor workers' pension fund and do a more favourable split for the pensioners who have contributed so much to that fund, especially given that the Beige report indicates that it was an arbitrary decision, that 50-50 back at the privatisation point. Moving on, of course, we've got innovation in our industries, world-leading research in our universities, and of course generosity, helping out in the pandemic, and very recently with these 10 million tests. We very much recognise the value of working collaboratively across the UK. And of course we've got huge resources to share across the UK, potential for wind, wave, tidal, and don't laugh, solar energy. But we need the UK government to strengthen the grid to ensure that our vast resources of energy can get to the centres of population they're needed. I won't start on the railways, Mr Chair, because you know as well as I do, we definitely need to have much better investment in the railways, and particularly electrification, not just for speed. It's not about speed, but for environmental reasons, and also, of course, to combat climate change, combat air pollution, and to deal with the noise. So what is important is, yes, to feel very proud to be Welsh, yes, to feel very proud to be British, but also to be proud of our local communities and to ensure that devolution means doing the right thing at the right level throughout the United Kingdom.
We need to reduce our time to about 4 minutes, about half the last length, so over to you, Virginia Crosby.
Good afternoon, Chair. It's a pleasure to speak under your chairmanship. Mae'n fraint gen I siarad yn y dethol hwn. Mae'n fraint gen I fod aelod seneddol Ynys Môn. Dwi'n fach o dysgu Gymraeg ac o hwbyr iaith Gymraeg ac enw pobl I ddefnyddio Cymraeg. Mr Davies, I'd like to say how proud I am to be the PPS for the Wales office at the first Welsh Grand Committee since 2018, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. I'm proud also to serve my amazing constituency of Ynys Môn. Our unique island community plays a pivotal role in the Union, with the port of Holyhead at the end of the A55 expressway, transporting freight and passengers between England and Wales and Ireland. Chair, you might be expecting me to talk about Wilbernewydd, and I was delighted that the Secretary of State said it was potentially one of the best nuclear sites in the world, or my campaign for Anglesey to be Wales's first free port. However, today I want to speak about a really local issue that's demonstrated why being part of a strong United Kingdom is so important to my constituents. One of the most rewarding parts of my job is helping local people who are facing challenging situations, and like others in this place, my team and I deal with hundreds of emails, phone calls and letters every single week. They come from residents, businesses, charities and community groups across Anglesey who need help, and their issues range far and wide. In recent months, I noticed an increase in people concerned about long ambulance waiting times, and a survey I carried out highlighted significant problems, and I received harrowing descriptions of those in pain waiting for hours for an ambulance. I was alarmed to find that 93% of my constituents were worried that they would not be able to get an ambulance if they needed one urgently on the island. And I must stress that local frustrations are in no way a reflection on the professionalism of our ambulance staff, and I know that our local crews work exceptionally hard and have just been through 2 extraordinary stressful years. So I wanted to understand what was at the root of the problem, and I spoke to Jason Killens, the head of the Welsh Ambulance Service, not long before Christmas. He explained that the service was under extreme pressure. COVID measures in hospitals meant delays getting ambulance patients into wards. Staff sickness was running at twice the normal level due to COVID and stress. And there had been a 25% increase in 999 calls. However, Jason told me that one thing that was making a huge and tangible improvement to response times, that was the help that the Welsh Ambulance Service had been getting from MACA, the military aid to civil authorities, since October 2021. At the time I spoke to him, 129 military personnel had been deployed to help, and as a result, the service had taken 90 minutes off its longest response time. But Jason said that more help was desperately needed, and so I wrote to the MOD to make his case. And recently, my Right Honourable friend, the Minister for the Armed Forces, wrote to me to confirm that an additional 184 personnel had now been deployed, and the total number of Armed Forces personnel now supporting the Welsh Ambulance Service is 313. I cannot tell you how many of these are working in my constituency, because our local health authority, Betsy Cadwallader, straddles the whole of North Wales. But what I can tell you is that I've already seen a decrease in my mailbox. Mr Davis, I would like to thank the military personnel who are supporting our ambulance service at this very critical time. And on behalf of my constituents, I want them to know that we are grateful for their intervention and we're grateful for the support of the union. It's a team effort. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you, Mr Davis. The world has certainly changed since the last Grand Committee debate in February 2018. If nothing else, has made us realise that whilst we're all from different backgrounds and live in different circumstances, ultimately we all face the same potential risks and difficulties when it comes to our health. And health, and in particular women's health, is something that I have a special interest in. Over the last 9 months, I have lived and breathed the menopause. I probably lived and breathed the menopause a lot longer than that, but publicly it's been the last 9 months. I'm very proud to stand up for the 51% of the population who will eventually directly experience this stage of life, and to work with colleagues right across the House in a bid to change the narrative. Because as I've said time and time again, there should be no politics in women's health. And when I first published my private member's bill ahead of its second reading in October last year, I imagine there was some confusion over its key ask for the cost of NHS HRT prescription charges in England to be slashed. Now, I count my blessings every day for the good fortune to have been born in Wales, don't we all? But we are so lucky in Wales, as are those living in Scotland and Northern Ireland, because they do not pay for prescriptions. So I wanted to level the playing field for women across the UK trying to access HRT treatment. But this was only one part of a much bigger picture. The other aim of the bill was to totally transform menopause support and services for women right across the UK, to improve diagnosis, to treatment and pathways, to ensure women have understanding and support of their doctors, their families, their friends and their employers, and to develop our school curriculum so that the next generation of girls and boys are better educated and will not face the same barriers that those of us who've come before have. I was very pleased when the government took this seriously and introduced a task force which will look at a wide range of issues and take an holistic approach to menopause care. And I'm also delighted with the reaction and response from the Welsh Government. Now, I've lost count of the number of emails, phone calls, Teams and Zoom meetings that I've had since we put the menopause high up on the political agenda. But two of the first people I spoke to were very well-respected colleagues and friends in the Welsh Government. Leonard Morgan, the Government Minister for Health and Social Services, and Jeremy Miles, the Welsh Government Minister for Education and Welsh Language. Both made an instant commitment to ensure the Welsh Government are on board and making the necessary changes in healthcare and education so that women in Wales will be able to access support and services they need to when it comes to menopause care. I have always believed that working together is how we achieve great things, whether it be cross-party in this place or by uniting with devolved governments. Nothing that I have accomplished has happened without doing this, be the Children's Funeral Fund, changes in gambling legislation or menopause care. We are better and stronger together, and we make the greatest impact by working alongside those around us. The people that we represent elect us to work in their best interests, to lead by example, and to make the right decisions for the greater good. This is when we earn their respect. Unfortunately, not all politicians deserve respect, and I would respectfully say that we should always put people before party, regardless of what kind of party. Our combined efforts on the menopause is something that has earned us respect. And I'm thrilled that the new task force is aiming to revolutionise menopause care right across the UK and to keep women wonderful, which I know that you all agree with. And I'm delighted I get to work alongside some fantastic Welsh government colleagues who will ensure that my constituents and all of our constituents are better served and supported to access the care and services they need. Our union is strengthened by us, by our commitment to work together and our ambition to make a difference and achieve common goals. Hopefully it won't be another 4 years before we attend the next next Welsh Grand Committee, but whilst we may not always have this arena, I know that we all must have the best interest of Wales at heart. Thank you, Mr Davies.
4 minutes, well done. Fru Jones. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, glasses, mask issue. I beg your pardon. Thank you, Mr Davies. It's an honour to be called in this debate and to have the chance to talk about levelling up as it relates to the Union. The levelling up agenda should be something that we all work towards, and I do endorse the comments of the Honourable Lady, the member for Swansea East West. Yeah. Thank you. Mr Davies, last week I was very proud to be the first person to use the word cwtch in the House of Commons. It's the first time it's ever been recorded in Hansard. Cwtch is hard to translate, but it is easily understood for Welsh people, much like the word hiraeth, which means a longing for one's home. Although it doesn't have an easy counterpart in English, hiraeth is something which many people recognise, as so many who grow up in Wales end up leaving. After years away beginning their careers, many then come home to Wales to raise their families. This is absolutely to be welcomed, but wouldn't it be wonderful if there was no need to leave Wales in the first place? If Wales had the academic institutions, the connectivity, the job opportunities and the infrastructure which prevented a drain of talent to England and further afield, that to me is what levelling up really means. Mr Davies, my constituents are proud unionists. They want their governments working together in partnership, not in adversity, as has been so often demonstrated by the Welsh Government. During the coronavirus pandemic, the wool that the First Minister has tried to pull over people's eyes has a familiar pattern. Any success is the personal achievement of the Welsh Labour Government. Any failure is the fault of the Conservative Party, all the while ignorant of the enormous financial interventions from the UK Government, which has protected thousands of jobs in all of our constituencies. Both governments should have tackled the pandemic together, making changes when they were truly required, not difference for difference sake, which motivated issues like the 5-mile rule and the banning of parkrun and the nonsensical ban on non-essential retail. As we exit the pandemic, I urge the First Minister in Cardiff to put down his weapons and engage with the UK Government to the benefit of everyone in Wales, to be honest about his own shortcomings and to introduce a specific Wales-wide inquiry into the pandemic. Now, I warmly welcome this debate, as I believe there are a number of ways in which the UK Government is working to level up rural Wales. And I do echo my honourable friend from Montgomeryshire's comments that we in rural mid-Wales are often forgotten about. My constituency is predominantly rural, and though, Mr Davies, you may well be forgiven for thinking that our future is solely agricultural, I'm optimistic about the future of our green economy in my constituency. I was delighted that in the budget in 2020, the Chancellor confirmed that the UK Government would fund the Global Centre for Rail Excellence in Nant Helen near Colbrenne in my constituency, and delighted further still when the Welsh Government rode in behind with a loan. This will see up to 120 skilled jobs at the new rail and infrastructure testing facility in a part of the world at risk of being forgotten. More green jobs is exactly what my constituency needs, whether in Colbrenne or at Riversimple in Llandrindod-Wells, a hydrogen fuel cell car manufacturer. These are the jobs of the future which will enable Mid-Wales to level up and join other parts of the United Kingdom in offering a future to our young people. Now, the Global Centre for Rail Excellence will set itself up in a part of my constituency where we have a large number of Welsh speakers, and I would like to make a point, if I may, about the Welsh language. And my grandfather was a first language Welsh speaker whose tendencies lay more with my honourable friends from Plaid Cymru than with me. That he turned out to have both a son and a granddaughter who would become Conservative MPs is probably still unsettling for him, even in the afterlife. But he inspired in me a great affection for the language, which I do still try to learn, albeit badly. It's by no means an easy language, but one with great poetry built in, and I do commend those in my constituency who do use the language frequently down in Ystrad-gan-Lais or Llanelwedd and up in the north in Rhaeadr. I often wonder what my Welsh-speaking, Plaid-supporting grandfather would have made of the fact that it was a Conservative government who introduced the Welsh Language Act and created the Welsh television channel S4C. I'm sure he also would have welcomed the extremely favourable settlement announced yesterday for S4C. Next month marks, of course, St David's Day, the annual celebration of our language and culture, and I'm delighted that for the first time Parliament will fly the Wraig Goch above Parliament. Mr Speaker has kindly agreed to host the first ever parliamentary Eisteddfod, and I hope all colleagues will attend. But as much as I'm keen and proud of the Welsh language and want to keep it thriving, I'm ambitious for Wales, and I want to see our nation lift up its eyes around the world. The Welsh Government sensibly has a target for more Welsh speakers, but where is its target for more Mandarin speakers, more French, more Farsi? I think it's really important that we give our young people as many opportunities as possible, and so I warmly welcome the government's introduction of the Turing scheme. I can see I'm getting the wind-up sign from Mr Davis, and I will conclude as quickly as I can, but I will end by emphasising my constituency's military links. I was deeply proud that we have managed to retain Brecon Barracks and overturn the Ministry of Defence's decision to close it. But cooperation has been a theme of our debate today, and on this I would urge greater cooperation from the Welsh Government. The Secretary of State for Wales has announced the intention to create a Veterans Commissioner. The Treasury has confirmed it will fund it. All we need now is for the Welsh Government to announce that it will work together. I'll give way briefly, if I'm allowed.
I understand the point she's making, and of course I welcome steps to support our veterans. But she went on this argument before in a previous debate in Westminster Hall, and in fact actually the Minister of the Armed Forces praised First Minister Mark Drake for the cooperation he had given with the Ministry of Defence. And indeed the Welsh Government has put huge amounts of extra resources, for example, into NHS Veterans Wales. So will she welcome what the Welsh Government's been doing for veterans, not just criticise them? I draw attention to my interests as well.
I will absolutely, well, I think I probably should have declared my interest in that my partner is a serving soldier.
Me too.
But I do think the Welsh Government could go further. I recognise that they are taking steps, they do recognise the severity of this issue, but we stand ready to create this role, which would ensure consistency right across Wales, and so far the Welsh Government has not quite crossed the line yet. Anything he's willing to help me with that, I would be very grateful. So I will wind up. I had plenty more to say around Operation Rescript, but I will end on that plea for cooperation from the Welsh Government again. Thank you.
David.
Mr Davis, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairpersonship. Could I say that it's appropriate that we're having this Grant Committee meeting today, because this is an important time for us to take stock and perhaps learn some lessons over what has happened over the last couple of years. There have been plenty of negatives, let's be honest, but there's also been some positives as well. And one of the greatest positives is the work that's been done by the Welsh Government and by the First Minister, Mark Drakeford. I think by common agreement across Wales, Mark has been calm, consistent, has always followed medical advice, and has always put the needs of the Welsh people first, and has always done the right thing. I've got to be honest too, what a contrast to the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Boris Johnson has been extremely economical with truth. Some would say he's been a downright liar, but only some would say that. He has dodged, deceived, inadvertently I'm sure, and has behaved in a reprehensible manner. And that's been consistent throughout much of the pandemic, but it's been highlighted, as we all know, over recent weeks. And what a contrast it is with Mark Drakeford. Boris Johnson was attending a Bring Your Own Booze party and inviting some 100 people, warned that it was not allowed under the own rules which his government had introduced, but nevertheless he proceeded with it and actually attended. So we, yes, we'd be happy to.
Can we just clarify that he's basing that statement on the words of that well-known truthful person, Dominic Cummings? Is that correct?
Wayne David.
That is correct. But already we hear there are two witnesses who have come forward and corroborate what Mr Cummings has said. It will be very interesting to get to the truth of this. And we all know, for any minister who lies to the House and tells them truths to the country, then there's only one honourable thing to do, and that is to resign. And we'll have to see if that is the case or not. Could I also say that is a sharp contrast with Mark Drakeford. What was Mark Drakeford doing at the time? Well, when the Prime Minister was attending his parties, the First Minister of Wales was isolating at the building at the bottom of his garden in order to protect his shielding wife and mother-in-law. What a contrast. That is a contrast that all people will see throughout the length and breadth of this country. But I think what we need to also reflect on the fact that the pandemic has brought certain things to the fore. And one of the things it has highlighted is the gross inequalities in Wales today. And the pandemic and the way it's been responded to by the present Westminster government has made the situation much worse for many ordinary people in Wales. I recently read the Bevan reports, a snapshot of poverty in the winter of 2021, written last December. And they come to the conclusion that nearly 4 in 10 Welsh households do not have enough money to buy anything beyond everyday items. That's 4 in 10 families who are denied access to a decent quality of life. And it's very, very important that we should not forget how difficult life is for many Welsh people today. And why is that? There's a multitude of reasons. But certainly exacerbating the situation is the fact that last November, central government reduced a universal benefit by £20 per week. That has hit thousands of families across Wales and has left them much, much worse off. We're also seeing the emergence of inflation, which is hitting hard the price of household goods. We are also seeing rising fuel costs, and that is likely to get worse, much worse, in the very near future. And we all have to say, what is the government here in Westminster doing? Well, sadly, very, very little. I would sincerely hope that the government will follow the advice of the Labour Party and reduce VAT at the very least, and do it pretty quickly as well. Could I say, in conclusion, therefore, Mr. Speaker, about the events of the last few months, the last couple of years, and when we look towards the future, I come to the unavoidable conclusion that things will only improve when we get rid of Boris Johnson as Prime Minister. I'm sure many members are coming to that conclusion themselves, but it's also not enough, because we have to have a fundamental change of direction by this government, and I believe a change of government as well. We had an excellent result with the Welsh Senate elections last year. I believe we can have a general election pretty soon, and there will be a good result in that election as well. Thank you.
I could have offered you an extra minute after you called me Mr. Speaker. I think James Davis, you are still wanting to speak? James.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is only the second Welsh Grand Committee that's been held during my 4 years as a Member of Parliament, but it's the first during those years when the use of the Welsh language has been facilitated. So, Mr Davis, mae'n bleser mawr cael gwasanaethu o dan eich cadairyddiaeth heddiw ac ymarfer fy Gymraeg llafar. Dwi'n mwynhau fy gynwersi Cymraeg wythnosol yn fawr iawn efo'r aelodau anrhydeithus dros Dwyrain Casnewydd ac Aberconwy. Mr Davis, I was lucky to be born in the city of St Asaph in the heart of my constituency, and I'm proud of my North Walian identity. I believe, no doubt like other honourable members in this chamber, that I understand my local communities inside out, and that belief has only been strengthened both during the time I've served as an MP, but also in the preceding 11 years, when I had the pleasure of representing my home ward in Prestatyn on Denbighshire County Council. I know how important it is to my constituents to see a thriving North Wales within a strong United Kingdom. They are far more interested in bread and butter policy than separatism and wrangling over yet more powers for Cardiff Bay. For North Wales especially, our links with other parts of the UK are vital. Many of my constituents travel to the northwest of England daily to shop, work and meet friends and family, whilst those living in the northwest and the West Midlands in particular come to North Wales for our beautiful coastline and welcoming hospitality. The COVID-19 pandemic has demonstrated the importance of a strong United Kingdom, particularly in relation to the immense financial support that's been required and our enviable vaccination and testing programmes. A further financial boost is set to be made available to the Welsh Government, and they will now receive the biggest block grant since the start of devolved government. Just over a month ago, the Prime Minister appointed the Right Honourable Baroness Hallett as chair of the forthcoming public inquiry into the COVID-19 pandemic. While there can be great benefit to a UK-wide inquiry, I've already written to Baroness Hallett to ask her that her independent inquiry should fully scrutinise all decisions that were taken in Cardiff Bay. All too often, the performance of the Welsh Government is considered in isolation, but we stand to learn so much more if that performance can be put into context with comparison against other parts of our country, and so I hope that will be the case. As a GP, I have a good understanding of local health services and how important the union is to patients in North Wales. Hugely valued NHS provision for North Wales is provided elsewhere in the UK, including at the Walton Centre, the Liverpool Heart and Chest Hospital, Alder Hey Children's Hospital, the Robert Jones and Agnes Hunt Orthopaedic Hospital, the Royal Stoke University Hospital, and so on. NHS clinicians within North Wales look to offer high quality care based on British healthcare standards. But again, comparison with other parts of the UK is often valuable to ensure our constituents are receiving the services they deserve. I raised the issue of Carol Ridgway with the Prime Minister last week. She had been faced with a lengthy wait of over 8 weeks following a suspected cancer referral. In England, she would likely have been offered an appointment within 14 days. I receive similar concerns on a regular basis, and other honourable members will no doubt acknowledge that they do also. Only last night I heard from a constituent who'd rather not be named, whose husband had a suspected mini-stroke earlier in the day. She was advised that the ambulance wait was 5 hours and that she should take him to A&E herself. She did so, but had to turn away and return home with him when she was told there was a 12-hour wait. She says, "My daughter and granddaughter both work in the Sheffield hospitals and certainly don't have the problems we have. In fact, they just don't believe what I tell them sometimes." My constituent asks, what is the Welsh Government doing to address this dreadful state of affairs? And so I hope that one of the outcomes of today's debate will be to send a strong message to the devolved administration that our constituents are desperate for them to focus on competent management of the areas they oversee, such as health and education. Mr Davis, I did want to speak about the Levelling Up Fund, the Community Renewal Fund, the Shared Prosperity Fund, the Mersey North Wales All-Party Parliamentary Group and the Union Connectivity Review, but there will be other opportunities. Thank you very much.
Just come on.
Mr Chairman, I should be speedy, but I'm not as brave as the Honourable Member for Vale Clwyd. Thank you, Chair. Very pleased to take part in this debate because, as speakers on this side of the House have said repeatedly today, the Union, far from being strengthened, is being weakened by the antics of this government and by the events that we've seen over the past weeks. And this lack of integrity and trust, particularly in the Prime Minister, is damaging the confidence in government. And as my honourable friend said in her opening remarks on this side, we believe the Union is strengthened when we cooperate across the UK, share wealth according to need, and all the energies of the government, on all governments, must be on recovering from the pandemic, tackling climate change, tackling the cost of living crisis, only set to get worse in April when national insurance contributions are cranked up to record levels, a measure we should remind ourselves that members opposite supported. Many of us won't recognise the rosy picture and list painted by the Secretary of State earlier. I want to focus on some practical examples in Newport East where the government could do much better, could perform much better by cooperating and working collaboratively with the Welsh Government for our communities, which is, after all, what we're here for. This is particularly true for rail. Many of my constituents commute cross-border. Many people from Bristol have moved into Newport East and Monmouthshire, but there's been a historic under-investment in cross-border services, under-capacity, unreliable, and yet the UK government bizarrely continues to effectively block the Welsh Government from providing more cross-border rail services into Bristol and beyond. And as a result, passengers on both sides of the Severn are losing out as a result. A new station for Mega could help traffic congestion in our area, and yet there's still no use from the Restoring Your Railways funding from the government. And as the Burns Commission and the Hendy Review note, we need to upgrade and reconfigure the relief rail lines, which is a job for UK government too, but no news on that. All local examples of UK rail underinvestment in Welsh rail. We have 11% of the rail network, but just 2% of rail enhancement funding and no share of HS2 funding. Next, on to the Western Gateway. It's time the UK government got fully behind the Western Gateway. It's a cross-border, pan-regional partnership representing a region of around 4.4 million people between Swansea and Swindon. Newport's at its heart, and despite the potential for economic regeneration, creating jobs, the Western Gateway is yet to receive the same level of recognition and visibility in government as other pan-regional partnerships like the Northern Powerhouse and the Midlands Engine. 2022 should be the year when the government gets to grips with this, including an assigned ministerial champion in government, and I hope ministers opposite will get moving with the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities to get on. I won't on this occasion because we've got others who want to speak. On levelling up, we all await the white paper, and you know, we're all aware that there's no definition and no plan, and whatever levelling up really means, and it's clear that no one in the government knows, we do know we're going to get less and we're going to have less of a say. Wales will only receive 46 million this year compared to the 375 million we would have received through EU structural funds. And it's always worth remembering, we were promised we would get not a penny less. And on steel, can I say, whilst this government, noticeably absent from the Secretary of State's opening remarks, whilst the Welsh Government uses the levers it has to help our steel industry, this government has failed repeatedly to address sky-high energy costs, unlike the Spanish and Italian other countries who step in and help. Fail to come up with an industrial policy. We get warm words on procurement, little in terms of helping our industry transition, and no news on what the government's going to do to lift tariffs. The world can't decarbonise without steel. Other governments can step in to help industry. Why won't ours? And what makes this all the more galling is all the while, week on week, there are a succession of revelations about government waste. The subject of another UQ just today, the Treasury lost billions in the relief scheme fraud, having written off 4.3 billion in an announcement they slipped out on Friday. That's money, that's half the UK policing budget around in the UK. That's money that could be spent to help people with fuel policy, to help our NHS. But yet again, this government has the wrong priorities and our communities deserve better.
Dwi'n croeso cyfle i siarad Gymraeg heddiw, ond dwi'n credu eich bod yn gwybod fy mod yn ddysgwr, felly mae'n rhaid i mi siarad Saesneg yma heddiw. Thank you very much, Chairman. I welcome the chance to speak today. I'm a proud Welshman, Cymro Falch dwi, and it has been a fascinating experience for me these last 2 years to be in this place, considering the matters which affect my home, where I was born, where I was raised in North West Wales. And as many of you will know, the Union has become a real point of interest to me, so I welcome this today, and I'm very grateful to the Secretary of State for securing this debate. But I asked myself, having listened to the contributions today, and I must say, I've always felt as Welsh politicians, we're quite a collegiate bunch. We get on, we have a laugh, we enjoy each other's company from time to time, and we can try and get things done, and I really hope that that spirit can continue through this debate. But it was a surprise to me that every effort I made to intervene on the opposite side during today was rebuffed. And that was a surprise to me because I think it's out of the character of the general debate and out of the character of the way we are in Wales. So I thought to myself, what would we do? What would a member of, or a resident of Aberconwy do, or what would they think rather of this title about strengthening the union? And I'll be really honest here, Chairman. I think they would say we all need to do better. It's a source of regret that this has contained a lot of personal attacks, merited or otherwise, because that's tangential to the question before us on how to strengthen the union. And that's a genuine source of regret to me that we've gone down that route at times in this debate. So I'd like to, if I may, make one suggestion to each of the parties represented here today about how each of us can strengthen the union. I will start, because we're in the context of the pandemic, I will start with this question: what would an inquiry into the pandemic in Wales count? And it would say that there have been more cases per 100,000, there have been more hospitalisations per 100,000, and also more deaths per 100,000 than other parts of the UK. Those are the numbers, and I checked them at lunchtime between these sessions. It would also say that we had more days in lockdown in Wales than other parts of the UK. And my point in this, in Aberconwy in particular, we spotted that early on that while in Blaenau Gwent there's a population density per square kilometre of 641, in Aberconwy it's just 104, sorry. But the death rate, sorry, not the death rate, the COVID death rate in Aberconwy was just 1/4 of what it was in Blaenau Gwent. And the reason I make that point is because the restrictions that were applied across Wales were applied across the whole of Wales, without differentiation and distinction. So in Aberconwy, we were subjected to exactly the same rates as a part of the country which had a 4 times higher death rate and also 6 times the population density. This really hurt, and it really felt painful to businesses and to many residents in Aberconwy. My point here is not to make an attack. It's to say that for the Welsh Labour government, I would respectfully suggest to strengthen the union, they could own their decisions. More money has been poured into Wales than ever before, but it is the decisions that have been made that are affecting the outcomes. Health outcomes in Wales are amongst the worst in the UK. You shake your head. Sorry, the member across from sedentary position shakes his head. This is what the numbers show. And as a result, we have to own those decisions, not least because health in Wales has been the responsibility of the Welsh Government for the last 22 years. I will move on as time is short. I will give way to the member. I will give way to the member.
We do need to get to the next speaker very quickly. Wayne David.
But I mean, it's ridiculous what he has suggested about in terms of sheer money coming into Wales from this government. We've seen cuts of about a decade under austerity, and now we've seen the issue of European funding and no clarity whatsoever about how much money is coming forward. So how on earth can he make the grand statement he is making?
Intervention, but he deflects. The facts stand as I've recited them. To our colleagues in Plaid Cymru, I'm very grateful for the approach that they took with their comments. As a proud Welshman, I listen hard actually to the Party of Wales and what it has to say to me as a Welshman. I'm really interested in that, and I genuinely want to engage with that. And the question I would put to them is this. The Secretary of State made the point about taxation and how, with a deficit approaching 20%, an independent government could form. And I mention the point of independence because this was raised as a manifesto position in the local elections in May, which incidentally resulted in a reduced representation and a reduced vote share. So there's a question there. But I would just ask the question, it's not so much about the finance, the moral duty of a government to look after the weakest and most vulnerable. That's the reason why Plaid Cymru must come forward with an explanation about how they would fund things. It's that moral duty to explain how they would look after, in an independent Wales, the weakest and most vulnerable. So finally, Chairman, if I may, I'll turn to the Conservatives, to my own party. And I would remind colleagues that in the elections, the turnout for the general election is 71%, I believe. And that contrasts with the turnout in the Assembly elections, the last Senedd elections, which were 47%. It is the people of Wales who are looking to this government to help them in their problems, every bit as much as they're looking to the Senedd. And we have that responsibility, and for that I would thank this government for what it has done with the UKIM Act and that ability to spend locally. We know that European funding decisions made in Wales, just 9% of them were passed to the local community and authority. The rest were held by the Senedd. Contrast that with England, where over 35% of those decisions were made by local authorities. That trust in localism is vital, and I welcome what's been done by the UK government to restore that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll finish with that. Encouragement to all to strengthen the union.
Thank you, Mr. Davis, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, sir. Today I speak as both a proud Welshman and a proud Brit. These two identities are not incompatible. Rather, it is this ability to identify as both Welsh and British that is one of the strengths of our union. Whether you are Welsh, Scottish, English, Cornish or a Yorkshireman, you can be all of these and still be British. Nationalists would have you believe that you cannot be both, that you must choose between being Welsh or British, but that is because nationalism is by its very definition divisive. While nationalists paint a very seductive image of an independent Wales that tugs on the heartstrings, their arguments tend to boil down to us versus them rhetoric, and they don't address fundamental questions around national security or the economy. National pride is deeply rooted in national prosperity and security. Economic strength is a foundation stone of national pride, and the fact is that this economic strength can be achieved only if the four nations of the UK club together and pool our resources.
On that point,
I will give way.
I'm agreeing entirely with him on the point he's making, but his party in the Senedd is in a coalition by any other name with the Nationalists and have started a commission which has admitted looking at independence. Would he reflect on that?
I thank the member for his intervention. It's not a coalition, is the first point. And the second point is that we are delivering a progressive agenda for the country under the leadership of a Welsh Labour government. Together, we are so much more than our component parts. Being patriotic and acting in the national interest is very different to nationalism. Nationalists don't have an answer about how they would plug the funding gap if Wales were to leave the UK, or how Wales would protect itself from external threats. And nationalism doesn't automatically mean decisions being made closer to the communities they impact, as we've seen with the SNP, who have centralised power in Edinburgh, leaving Holyrood one of the most centralised administrations in Europe. Britain remains a significant economy and world power, and Wales benefits from being part of that. It gives us a much stronger voice on the world stage, and it allows for money from wealthier parts of the UK to be redistributed to Welsh communities, in principle, if we had a government in Westminster that was actually delivering on that. As we live in an era of great power competition, and with increasing threats, Wales is safer and more secure as part of the UK, protected by UK-wide national security organisations and by our armed forces, which include Welsh regiments. To overcome the forces that want to break up the Union, we need a positive and patriotic vision for Britain, one that doesn't take reckless risks with the economic and national security, but instead promotes reciprocity, cooperation and solidarity across our nations and regions. Over the last few years, we've seen how Wales being part of the Union is not only good for Wales, but good for the Union too. The NHS is one of the great examples of this, an institution with Welsh roots that has benefited for the whole of the UK. It's been at the front line of this pandemic, and the vaccine rollout has been a resounding success in Wales, a testament to the hard work of our NHS staff. But let's remember, they've also been able to call on the support of the UK Armed Forces to help with the rollout when needed. I will be quick.
This speech is so good that I'm worried that the Honourable Gentleman might get in trouble from his own side. But can I just ask you one further question, which is, does it worry him as much as it worries us that Adam Price, the coalition slash cooperation bedmate of Mark Drakeford, describes the arrangement in Cardiff as a down payment on independence and leading to an independent Wales sooner rather than later? Does that worry him?
A great deal of respect for the Secretary of State, but I'm afraid his intervention has just, for me, encapsulated the problem with this whole debate, which has been about blame game, throwing mud. I am making a case for the values upon which our union is founded. And I think it's the responsibility of all of us in this room to stop the blame game and to actually work together in the national interest. In the national interest. As I've already said, we have a government in Wales which is delivering a progressive Welsh Labour agenda. That is absolutely clear, and that's based on the resounding victory that we secured at the last Welsh Senedd election. More recently, when the UK government ran short of lateral flow tests, it was the Welsh government that came to their aid, providing 4 million lateral flow tests. The UK government should never run short, but that is how cooperation should work within the Union. The Union is far from perfect, and Brexit and the pandemic have exposed the cracks in our constitutional settlement. It's revealed a central government in Westminster that hasn't been listening enough, and nations and regions that feel that they are at best not consulted and at worst ignored. The relationship between the four governments should be based on a partnership of equals, mutual respect, and be fair. The UK government's Internal Market Act, which seeks to prevent the emergence of unwanted barriers to trade within the UK, ended up undermining powers devolved to the Scottish and Welsh governments. This may seem like a political argument, but it goes to the very heart of what many see as what's wrong with the Union, a sense of unfairness and inequality. This inequality runs much deeper. Despite the UK government's talk of levelling up, there remains an economic divide in the country which is continuing to grow. With wealth and power concentrated in London and the South East, many in communities in Wales feel left behind, and that system doesn't work for them. It's led to growing disillusionment with Westminster, which is seen as being out of touch with large swathes of the country, which in turn plays into the hands of the nationalists. If the Union is to continue, it needs to modernise. It must mean something tangible to people now and in the future. The union needs to reflect the desire to have power closer to the people. It should encapsulate common beliefs and ideals, and it needs to celebrate the rich histories and identities of different nations and regions. Because Britain cannot have a shared future without having shared values. We need to build a positive and patriotic narrative about what it means to be both Welsh and British now and in the future. It must reflect the values, the aspirations and the experiences that we all have in common, whilst also recognising and celebrating the uniqueness of being Welsh. A well-functioning union must include everyone, with no one person or group left behind. Wales's future is best served by having strong devolution so that decisions made about Wales are made in Wales, and by being an equal partner in a strong and revitalised United Kingdom. Belligerent behaviour from the UK government, disparaging comments from ministers about the nations and regions, and a Prime Minister who's described devolution as the biggest mistake of the last Labour government, is doing more to damage and undermine the union, whilst nationalists cheer from the sidelines. Like other proud Welshmen and women, I will be cheering on Wales when the Six Nations begins next month. I will be right behind the Welsh football team when they take on Austria as they bid to qualify for the World Cup. I'll be cheering on Wales athletes competing in the Commonwealth Games this summer, as I cheered them on at the Tokyo Olympics last summer when they represented the United Kingdom. I will also proudly wear a daffodil to mark St. David's Day. None of this makes me any less British, and being British doesn't make me any less Welsh. George Orwell said that patriotism is a devotion to something that is always changing, and yet is felt to be mystically the same. It is the bridge between the future and the past. Mr. Davis, if we cherish the union, then we must be willing to change and to modernise it. Thank you.
Committee is the first Conservative woman elected in Wales, followed very swiftly by the member for Ynys-Môn and then Brecon and Radnorshire. Mr. Chairman, I want to follow on the theme laid out by my honourable friend for the Vale of Clwyd. I trained as a nurse in the same hospital which 30 years later I returned to support the fight against COVID. 30 years ago, the health service in Wrexham was the envy of all, especially from our neighbours across the border. But over the past 10 years, I have seen, as have my constituents, the healthcare provision in Wrexham crumble. And that is why I will focus on what I and my constituents consider to be the biggest shortcoming of the Welsh Labour government: healthcare. Now, we know that money won't in itself improve services, but it is part of the solution. Last year alone, the UK government provided £3.8 billion under the Barnett formula to the Welsh Labour government. And this was in addition to the £5.2 billion the Welsh Labour government received to fight COVID. Now, that's in addition to the UK government's secured 6.5 million doses of the vaccine. And I need to mention, Chair, that it was Wockhart in my constituency of Wrexham that made the AstraZeneca vaccine jab ready. And it was Her Majesty's government which created the environment, enabling Wockhart to act swiftly, benefiting not only Wales, the UK, but globally with the COVAX programme. Now, despite the funding, Welsh Labour government has failed to deliver even an acceptable level of healthcare. In the past 5 years, NHS Wales has made 29 MACA requests. That's 29 cries for help to the UK government. 8 MACA requests for the ambulance service alone, 5 being approved to the sum of 2.8 million. Now, this demonstrates the UK government's commitment to Wales and our union, as my honourable neighbour for Clwyd South detailed previously. Now, Mr Davis, for the past 20 years, the Welsh Labour government have blamed the UK government for the poor services and health outcomes across Wales because they don't get enough money. We know they do, but instead of spending it where it is needed, they choose to save it, presumably for a rainy day, or spend it on grandiose white elephants like Cardiff Airport and Pinewood Studios. In 2012, under the ministerial responsibility of the Senedd member for Wrexham, Welsh Labour government reduced the healthcare budget, meaning that it is now being underfunded to the tune of 400 million. The only government in Britain ever to have done this, and the results we can see today. The 95% target for patients waiting less than 4 hours in A&E has never been met. 1 in 5 people in Wales are on the waiting list for surgery, and to address this in North Wales, the Health Board have contracted out to England, as the Right Honourable Member for Clwyd West detailed earlier. And over Christmas, it was reported in the media that the Wrexham Myler Hospital is the worst in Wales for A&E waiting times. However, well before the pandemic, NHS Wales was in dire straits. Betsy Cadwallader University Health Board, which serves the people of North Wales, was in special measures from 2015, but despite no tangible improvements in patient care and outcomes, the board was lifted out of special measures late 2020, a few months before the next Senedd election. It would be remiss of me, Chair, because I can see you chivvying me on, just to go through a few of the details that come into my casework every single day about the healthcare provision in Wrexham. 18 hours in A&E to be seen, having been referred by a doctor for a blood clot. Elderly patients sitting in A&E with no medication, food, desperately trying to get the attention of overworked, undervalued staff. Ambulances backed up to 13 in number. People sitting and lying 12 hours in the back of vehicles, even to be seen by a doctor. Constituents giving up waiting for orthopaedics, going abroad for risky, cheap surgery. Diabetic monitoring cut to once a year. 3 years to see a gastroenterologist. 2 years for pain management. And GPs sending people, and A&E sending people over the border to access minor injury units. Therefore, I urge the ministers in Cardiff to look at Wrexham and undertake an inquiry to see what is actually going on there and what people are experiencing. One last point, I'll just wind up, Chair. It's the clinicians that can sort out our NHS, and I urge the Welsh Labour Government and the Health Minister to give the clinicians the voice and the influence they have to sort out the provision for my constituents in Wrexham. Thank you.
About 7 minutes of the opposition front benches and 10 minutes for the government front bench. Hal Williams.
Davies, rwy'n falch o gael crynhoi ar gyfer y ddadl yma. Newch chi fadda gobeithio os na i wneud un pwynt byr hanesyddol tra mae pawb roed i cefn siarad ymlaen. O ran yr undeb yn y cyfnod hanesyddol o leia, nid heddiw, falle credaf mae'r Encyclopedia Britannica oedd agosa at y gwir yn y mynegau o dan Wales, dyweda'r Encyclopedia Britannica See England. Ond yn fwy na hynny o dan England, does na fawr o ddim yna ynglyn â Wales. Nid felly mai heddiw yma, mae yna ddatblygiad di bod, ddatblygiad iach iawn, dwi'n meddwl, yn y berthynas, ac fel dymlydd doedd Ron Davies yn enwog iawn, mae proses ydy hyn, nid digwyddiad, a mae'r broses yn mynd yn ei blaen. Felly mae'n briodol iawn bod ni yn trafod yr undeb, ond i ni gydnabod bod yr undeb fel y mae o ddim yn sefyll yn llonydd, ac efallai fydd o ddim yna yn y dyfodol. Da ni'n gwybod yn iawn bellach, mae rhywbeth i'w adeiladu bob dydd o'r newydd ydy hunaniaeth. Dyna sut mae hunaniaeth yn cael ei ddiffinio. Mae'n cael ei greu a'i ail gynnal. Mae'n tybiaeth ni'n ynglyn â hunaniaeth wrth gwrs yn amrywio un ochr i'r llall ac efallai ymysg pobl yn yr wrthblaid hefyd. Ond mae Cymru yn bodoli oherwydd fod pobl Cymru yn ewyllysio i bod i yn goroesi, bod Cymru yn goroesi. Felly hefyd yr undeb presennol wedi ei greu a'i gynnal undeb sydd yn dyddio ond ers y 20au pam ddaru'r Gwyddelod sicrhau i rhyddid nhw. Rwan, felly mae'r undeb yn datblygu, fel da ni wedi clywed heddiw yma, mae'r ddadl ynglyn â'r undeb weithiau yn aml iawn, i ddweud gwir, yn fasnachol iawn i'n naws. Taswn ni sefyll mewn stafell ddarlithio, so ni'n cael efo'r gair Saesneg transactional, o bobl yn tueddu feddwl o gewch chi hyn, neu da ni'n cael y llall. Ac mae yna rhywbeth arall i'r undeb sy'n ni yn sicr yn cytuno, a mae yna rhywbeth llawer iawn hefyd i'w ddweud dros annibyniaeth o ran gwerth, nid rhywbeth sydd yn fasnachol fel hyn. Da ni yn gweld dadleuon a glwson yn ei heddiw yma fod y fam undeb fel tai yn darparu yn hael yn tywall buddion unigryw na fyddai ddim ar gael fel arall i ni. So ni byth yn medru i hennill nhw, i dyfeisio nhw neu fforddio nhw'n hunan. Ar y llaw arall, dwedir heb yr undeb fyddwn ni mewn lle sal iawn. Fel soniodd nifer o aelodau gan gynnwys aelod gorllewin Clwyd yn drawiadol iawn, os gael dweud, byddwn ni wedi enllethu gan ddoled heb wasanaeth iechyd digonol, heb addysg deilwng a'r gogledd o hyd dan Bawen, Milan, a'r un beth yna o'r South. Does rhyfedd felly bod rhai pobl ifanc, dim ond rhai yn meddwl yn y terma masnachol yma am yr undeb, a dylwn ni warchod yn erbyn hynny, dwi'n meddwl. Efallai bod nhw'n aralleirio John F. Kennedy a dweud, ask not what I can do for the Union, but ask what the Union can do for me. A dwi'n meddwl bod hynna rhywbeth i warchod yn ei erbyn. Diolch byth. Yna rhai bobl ifanc eraill yn meddwl mewn terma mwy aruchel a gobeithio mewn ffordd mwy gobeithiol am ein gwlad ac am yr undeb gyda gweddill gwledydd ar yr ystydd yma. Ond masnachol neu aruchel, mae'r dueddiad i'w gweld yn glir. Pobl hyn sydd yn cefnogi'r undeb a'r gefnogaeth honno yn lleihau yn sylweddol ac yn drawiadol iawn wrth i oedran y grŵp a holi'r ostwn. Mae'r gefnogaeth i annibyniaeth yn mynd yn iau ac unolyddiaeth yn heneiddio. Felly, does ryfedd fod twf cyson yn y garfan sy'n gofyn os ydy'r undeb cystal pan ei bod ni mewn y fath gyflwr. Ac i ateb pwynt gan aelod bore yma, mae Plaid Cymru a Plaid Werdd yn cefnogi annibyniaeth, ond hefyd, os oes yna rhyw dryst i'w roi ar y polau, mae tua hanner cefnogwyr llafur hefyd naill ai yn cefnogi neu yn barod i ystyried annibyniaeth, beth bynnag o ddywed ei harweinwyr. Felly, o'n i wedi gobeithio cael mwy amser i drafod y pwyntiau yma, ond i droi at gyfraniadau unigol. Ni'n falch iawn o weld y cyfraniadau yn Gymraeg, dwi'n meddwl yn Sedwsiwn heddiw yma. Agorodd yr ysgrifennydd gwladol gan ymffolio manteision yr undeb ac yn deud bod hain ond yn bosibl o fod yn yr undeb. Nath o ddim sôn am unrhyw anfanteision posibl gyda llaw. Dwi'n falch fod i gysgod wedi rhestru llu o bethau da a ddaeth yn sgil datganoli, ond roedd hi hefyd yn gwbl glir yn ei barn hi o le fod y blaid lafur yn gwbl bleidiol i'r undeb. Cymylwyd y ddadl gan gyfeiriadau aml at Brydain gyfan, at Loegr yn unig, ac cyfeiriodd un aelod at yr English Government ac un arall at y Four Governments. Mae yna angen i ni fod yn gliriach ynglyn am beth da ni'n sôn yn y pwyllgor yma. Dwi'n meddwl, nid bod fi'n beriadu chi, Mr Davies, o gwbl. Chwynodd yr aelod dros Gorllewin Clwyd am Lywodraeth Cymru yn cynnig comisiwn ar yr undeb Prydeinig. Safdododd aesg Caredigion ac aesg Dwyrain Carfyrddin ar eithaf llachar iawn, sy'n rhaid i ni fynd ar ôl yr pynciau nath nhw drafod, ond oedd yna bethau fel HS2, Stad y Goron, Brexit a Gogledd Iwerddon ar undeb, tlodi, datganoli a datganoli y drefn gyfreithiol. Roedd aelod gwir anaddyddus Penfro Preseli'n cwyno am y feirniadaeth gyson y byd o Llywodraeth Cymru o Lywodraeth Prydain, ac fel enghraifft mi ddywedodd o death race in the UK compare well with other similar countries. Nes i gael golwg amser cinio ar y rhifa yn ôl y miliwn ydy Teyrnas Gyfunol 2267, Ffrainc 1772, Almaen 1393. Mr Davies, dwi'n sylweddoli, does gynnau ddim mwy amser i drafod llu o bwyntiau a godwyd. Fe rai weld, jyst ar y papur mae gynnau ymlaen, mae yna ddwsin fysa yn werth i trafod mewn dadl unigol. Felly gobeithio fyddwn ni yn cael dadleuon ar y pwyntiau yma, naill yn Westminster Hall neu efallai yn bellach yn yr uwch bwyllgor Cymraeg. Yr oll fyswn ni yn deud i orffan am hwn yn bwynt gwleidyddol, cwbl bleidiol newch i faddau mi. Does rhyfedd mae cryfhau'r undeb a ddewiswyd fel mater o gynsyrn heddiw, oherwydd y gwir ydy fod y gefnogaeth i annibyniaeth yn tyfu ac yn mynd yn iau, tra bod y ddadl unoliaethol yn lleihau ac yn heneiddio. Diolch yn fawr.
Glywch. 7 minutes, 10 to. Thank you, Carol.
Jochen Bow, Mr Davis, it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship today. It's been a great opportunity today for us to spend time talking specifically about Wales at the Welsh Grand Committee. It's been far too long since we had this opportunity. I would like to take the opportunity to pay tribute to how staff who facilitated today's sessions, particularly those who have supported the translation services. I'm a unionist, unequivocally and proudly be so, proudly Welsh and proudly British, believing in the United Kingdom and in a strong Wales working with other nations in a strong UK based on mutual respect. Sadly, what we've witnessed in recent years is that the Conservative and Unionist Party have done more to damage the Union than those who wish to break it apart. I would like to pay tribute to those who have spoken in today's debate, particularly the member for Cynon Valley, who talked about the Welsh Government and the first to declare, being the first to declare a climate emergency, the votes for 16 and 17-year-olds, and the Future Wellbeing Act as an act that bodes well for the whole of the UK and something for us all to learn from. Also the member for Newport West, who talked about the fact that the UK is being let down by a Prime Minister that's out of his depth and is low on trust, and about the anger and frustration from our constituents in recent weeks. The member for Cardiff North talked about the heartbreak of many of our constituents during the pandemic and contrasting the trusted and supportive approach by Welsh Government with the shenanigans at Number 10 and the Tory Government. The honourable friend, the member for Llanelli, talked about and reiterated the lack of support from the UK Government in comparison to what we've received in structural funds, and that the years of experience of the Welsh Government and local government working together could be lost. Honourable friend, the member for Swansea East, talked about her bids with the menopause to change the narrative and highlighted the different approach by the government in Wales and other nations across the UK, and spoke of the quick and decisive action of Welsh ministers in supporting her campaign. My honourable friend, the member for Caerphilly, talked about and reflected on the First Minister's calm and careful approach and the contrast with the shocking behaviour that we've seen from the Prime Minister. My honourable friend, the member for Newport East, talked about the Union being weakened by the antics of this government and the huge underinvestment in rail and no benefit from HS2, and also a plea to get behind the Western Gateway. And my honourable friend, the member for Aberafan, highlighted and passionately spoke about how it's possible to be both Welsh and British, and the fact that together we achieve more than our individual parts, and the fact that nationalism in all its forms is divisive. And also pay tribute to other members who've spoken today as well. I have to say, Mr Davis, that there is a certain irony in the Conservative Party calling a debate on strengthening the Union when they can't even unite their own party. Senior Tory MPs have been scuttling around their TV studios over the weekend, pressured into supporting a discredited Prime Minister when the British public no longer believe a single word he says. I'm afraid the Conservative Party has lost all moral authority. Rather than strengthening the Union, the Conservative Party is the single biggest threat to the United Kingdom. And as my honourable friend, the Shadow Secretary of State, highlighted, you only have to see the derisory way in which members of the government treat their own Conservative leaders in Wales and Scotland to see the contempt they hold for the nations and regions of the UK. Time and time again, the Conservative government has let down the people of Wales. Just prior to last November's budget, the First Minister of Wales wrote to the government highlighting the need for investment in the restoration of coal tips across Wales. The budget resulted in those calls being largely ignored. The government seemed unwilling to work jointly to resolve remediation works required to make coal tips safe. My constituency covers the community of Aberafan, and there is no greater example of a failure to address coal tip safety. We know that the legacy of coal tips predates devolution. The export of coal from the South Wales valleys and elsewhere helped to create the wealth that built this country. Responsibility for the issue therefore transcends the devolution arrangements, and Wales is affected, as we know, disproportionately by the legacy of coal mining in the UK. But the existing devolution settlement and broader legal arrangements fail to recognise this. We've heard a lot today about levelling up, but words are meaningless without solid and sustained action to back them up. There is little evidence to suggest that Wales will continue to receive the level of funding that we've received in the past via EU structural funds, despite the promise that Wales would not lose a penny. Shared prosperity funding was meant to be in the region of £1.5 billion per annum to match EU funds, yet the figure in the budget for the next financial year is 400 million, hardly levelling up. Investment is needed to reduce regional inequalities. The unsatisfactory timescale for awarding the first round of funding demonstrates that Whitehall does not have the capacity to manage the level of applications, let alone the monitoring and evaluation that is required going forward. Why then is there still a reluctance to consider that the sensible thing to do would be to allow decisions around these funds to be managed by the Welsh Government? The top-down approach from Whitehall simply will not work. The Government is keen to allocate funding, even though those funds in areas of Welsh Government's responsibilities, that they are reluctant to fund areas that predate devolution, such as coal tips. In addition, funding should be allocated on a needs basis. Local authorities competing for each other with questionable decisions around allocation is far from satisfactory. So in conclusion, let's recap on the Tory record. They've derailed plans to electrify Wales's railway lines. They've sunk proposals for new green jobs at the tidal lagoon. They've refused to help with the legacy of coal mining communities. They've provided little detail on how the Shared Prosperity Fund will look, and they've taken money from the poorest in our communities, just as the people are feeling the impact of the Conservatives' cost of living crisis. Under this government, the phrase "for Wales see England" has never been more true. And as we've heard earlier, when the Welsh Government asked for the Treasury support to take crucial public health measures, the Chancellor refused, only to be offered when similar arrangements were needed in England a few weeks later. The Conservatives have never believed in a union of equals. Theirs is a continuation of outdated colonial attitudes that have no place in modern society. By contrast, Labour is explicitly a unionist party. We believe that with the strength of our common endeavour, we achieve more than we achieve alone, whether that's by joining a community group, a political party, a trades union, or the Union of the United Kingdom. We look to a future with a strong Wales in a strong United Kingdom, with 4 nations being treated equally and with respect, and I sincerely hope that the Government can step up to that challenge.
David. Well, Mr. Cadeirydd, can I start by saying what a pleasure it is to serve under your chairmanship, and my happiness in that is marred only by my sadness that you are no longer able to entertain us with one of your speeches here. Ga i dweud diolch yn fawr iawn I pawb sy'n wedi cymryd rhan yn y dadl heddiw. Byddai'n gwneud yn rhai I tynnu sylw at pawb a phopeth, ond dwi ddim yn siŵr bod hynny'n mynd I fod yn bosib mewn now funud. But perhaps I could start with the member for Merthyr Tydfil, who's just mentioned the importance of coal tips and coal tip safety, and just say that actually this is something that the UK government has taken very seriously, and they have given extra money, but it is a devolved issue, and we've spent most of the last couple of hours listening to many members criticising the UK government, saying the UK government are not working with the Welsh government on devolved matters and are trying to override them, and then we finally hear a speech where we're being asked to override the Welsh government's responsibility and go directly involved in something. What we have done is to deliver an extra £3.8 billion to the Welsh Government, and the Welsh Government has got the powers to deal with coal tip safety, and I would urge them to do so if there is any doubt about the safety. We heard a number of members from Cardiff Central, Cardiff North, Newport East, and possibly others talk about funding post-Brexit. And here are the figures, because it's very important. Wales has not lost out a penny as a result of Brexit. Between 2014 and 2020, agriculture received £337 million a year on average, and it has continued to do so post-Brexit. EU structural funds were £375 million on average over those years, and what's actually happened is that with the 320 that was already coming from the EU, the 46 Community Renewal Fund, the £121 million Levelling Up Fund, Wales received not £375 million, but around £460 million in Levelling Up funds. So Wales has not lost out. There has already been a huge Brexit benefit as a result of pulling out of the European Union. Yr aelod o Ceredigion wedi tynnu sylw at bwysigrwydd o sailwaith reilffordd, a dwi'n cytuno yn llawn, and the member for Newport East also asked about this. Problem you, of course, that ni ddim yn gallu just transform a system dros nos. Mae'n cymryd blynyddoedd I wneud hynny. Ond dwi wedi cael llawrion o gyfarfodydd gyda Network Rail I trafod y linell yn Gysnawydd, hefyd yn y Gogledd Cymru. The line in South Wales is actually being developed and going through the business case process, and the one in North Wales a little bit further behind. Ond un peth sy'n bwysig iawn I cofio ydy'r ffaith bod mae rhai prosiectau sy'n cymryd lle ar hyn o bryd, bod nhw'n tu allan o Cymru, yn creu effaith positif iawn am teithwyr sy'n dod o Cymru I Lloegr. Ac roeddwn ni gyda Network Well yn gas gwent ychydig o misoedd yn ôl I trafod y prosiect sy'n cymryd lle nawr yn y Forest of Dean. So it is important to remember that we have to have a joint approach across the whole of the United Kingdom for improvements in rail. Yr aelod o'r Cynon Valley wedi siarad am y Comisiwn Cyfansoddiadol. Y ffaith bod nhw'n mynd I gael meddwl agored tuag at y cwestiwn o ein cyfansoddiad. Wel, dyna beth maen nhw'n dweud. A fi'n yn wir, maen nhw'n cael ei arweiniad gan cyn ymgyrchwyr Plaid Cymru gyda help o cyn Archgesgob, the former Archbishop of Canterbury, sy'n disgrifio ei hun as a hairy old lefty. I mean, dwi ddim yn really disgwyl unrhyw beth ar wahanol ffaith bod nhw'n mynd I fynd o gwmpas Cymru yn wario arian ac amser, yn siarad gyda cyfnogwyr yn y byniaeth, yn y wasg, yn academydd, yn y prifysgolion ac yn y blaen, adar o'r un lliw, ac yn mynd I dod yn ôl mewn ychydig o misoedd gyda adroddiad sy'n mynd I ddweud mae rhaid ni gael mwy o grym i'r cynulliad. I mean, we can say the whole load of money right now. I could write the report for them. I know exactly what they're going to say. They're going to demand all sorts of extra powers for the Assembly and ask that Mark Drakeford has some sort of a blocking role over anything that's done by the Conservative Party and government in the United Kingdom. So let's save ourselves some money here. The various members, of course, raised the health service, quite rightly so. The member for Swansea East, one of the most sensible members of the Labour Party, if I may say so, drew attention to her very worthy campaign to raise the issue of the menopause and HRT, and free prescriptions are not something that I necessarily would agree with her as being a good thing for, because they actually mean that everyone gets a prescription for free, even though some people can well afford to pay, and perhaps could be putting their money towards the worthy campaigns that she mentioned. But two of my own colleagues from the Vale of Clwyd and Wrexham have first-hand experience of the health service, and along with the member for Clwyd West, drew attention to the fact that after over 20 years of a Labour government in one form or another in Wales, a Labour government that talks up the health service all the time, the reality is that people are waiting longer in Wales, waiting longer for treatment, waiting longer for ambulances, and not able to get access to drugs which are available in England. And at the same time, I think my right honourable friend also mentioned education. This is another area of policy which the Welsh Labour government have had full control over, and the results have been disgraceful. One former education minister actually went out and apologised to the people of Wales in a front-page newspaper column in the Western Mail a few years ago for the fact that learners in Wales are less likely to get GCSEs than in England, are less likely to get A-levels than in England, and are less likely to go to the best universities. And what has been the response of the Welsh Government? Not to go out there and work out what on earth is going wrong with our education system in Wales. No, it's to pull out of the PISA model, which is actually the only way of being able to verify just how well it is they're doing in comparison with health systems across the rest of the world. The Honourable Member for Bridgend and various others actually raised the issue of respect, and this is something that I fully agree with. We do respect the Welsh Government, the fact that it exists. We respect the fact that there have been two referendums where people have voted in favour of devolution. And it would be nice if there was a bit of mutuality about this. It's about time that the Welsh Labour Government recognised the fact that the majority of people in Wales voted for Brexit and wanted to see Brexit delivered and didn't want to see it blocked by a group of people who also owned their own jobs to a referendum. Mr. Chairman, in starting to close, may I say that a number of people in this chamber on both sides have raised the issue of levelling up. What is levelling up? Well, I can say what levelling up is. Levelling up is about the growth deals that are now in place across the whole of Wales, some of which are already delivering projects, such as one in my right honourable friend's constituency. It's about the free ports, and we know that there is now progress towards a free port in Wales because the Welsh Government have finally realised that if they're going to happen in Wales and Scotland, that it's about time they got in on the act. It's about the rail infrastructure, about upgrading the South Wales Freight Line and the North Wales coastline and all the other projects that are taking place across Wales. It's about £18.5 billion, an extra £2.5 billion this year for the Welsh Government to spend on supporting the jobs which have been threatened as a result of COVID. What a marvellous job the Treasury have done in making sure that all parts of the United Kingdom were supported. through this terrible time. And it's about using the resources of Britain, which is what happened, by the way, in that, at the start of that crisis, to make sure there was PPE available, to make sure that Nightingale hospitals were built in record time, to make sure there were enough ventilators, and we didn't run out of PPE, we didn't run out of ventilators, we had the space in the hospitals, and we were able to go out and develop a vaccine that was bottled in my honourable friend's constituency, but also actually it was boxed in Monmouthshire, because Triwall in my own constituency were responsible for actually boxing that vacuum up, the vaccine up. So, Mr. Chairman, in closing, may I say, actually, one of the finest speeches we had was from the honourable member for Port Talbot, Aberavon, indeed, Aberavon, who spoke for so many of us when he said, "It is quite possible to be proud to be Welsh, to be proud to be British, and to be proud supporter of the Union that has delivered so many benefits for Wales over the years." John Dargiel.
The question is that the committee has considered strengthening the Union as it relates to Wales. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. On the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Order.
Committee Room 14 sound.
Has ended. The proceeding has ended. The proceeding has ended.